By modern standards, life in ancient Rome was simply terrible. Slavery was rampant everywhere. Healthcare was very primitive, and if a person was poor, then the only way for him to retire with some savings was 20 years of military service. Nevertheless, it was one of the most progressive societies on Earth at that time, and there is some evidence of this. When the Popularists faction was in power, the government actively worked to empower the people at the expense of the elite. The Senate funds were used to buy farms from wealthy people and then distribute them to the poor, as well as to create hospitals where the poor were treated for free. Most of the public buildings were built and maintained with public funds, and entrance fees were a pittance. So, why was ancient Rome surprisingly progressive? 1. Free food. In the early years of the Roman Empire, Rome's population grew rapidly. At the same time, wealthy landowners were buying up agricultural land outside the city, forcing poorer farmers to go to the city to work. As a result, there were a large number of impoverished people who struggled to find permanent jobs. Gaius Gracchus' grain law of 123 BC solved this problem by offering grain at half the market price once a month to anyone who was willing to stand in line and wait for it. The practice of distributing grain to the poorest Romans lasted for 6 centuries and was revised during the reigns of Julius Caesar and Octavian Augustus. Since then, grain has been completely free, but only the poorest 200,000 Romans were eligible to receive it. A test was introduced to determine who was the poorest. Although the grain was free, people still had to pay for the services of millers. In 270 AD, Emperor Aurelian changed the system, replacing grain with fresh bread, and introduced a system in which pork, butter, and salt were also regularly distributed free of charge. This practice ended only with the fall of the empire in the 5th century. 2. Military pensions. Throughout the history of the Roman Empire, soldiers received a pension at the end of military service, 16 years for praetorians, 20 years for ordinary legionnaires. In the early years of the empire, this payment was usually made in the form of allotments of land. However, these lands were often reconquered by invaders, as they were located on the border of the empire, where they were vulnerable to raids or were in state ownership, which was often leased or temporarily used by other tenants. Needless to say, such options were not particularly suitable for an ordinary soldier. In 06 AD, Octavian Augustus curtailed this program and replaced it with a monetary payment scheme. Since then, each legionnaire has received 12,000 sesterces upon honorable discharge. He was also given a bronze plaque with a record of his completion of service. This amount was approximately equal to the salary of a legionnaire for 12 years and would be more than enough to allow a soldier to buy property. Augustus invested 170 million sesterces from the imperial treasury to launch this payment system and supported it with a 5% inheritance tax and a 1% tax on all goods sold at auction. Many of the wealthy Roman elite complained about this, considering the taxes prohibitive for them. But the system ultimately benefited Rome by making the soldiers believe that the emperor would honor their loyalty by providing them with a pension. It also ensured that anyone, regardless of social class, could live in prosperity in the second half of their life if they completed their military service. 3. Free entertainment. In the modern world, people find it natural to pay for going to the stadium or to the cinema. In Roman times, access to any show, be it gladiatorial fights, theatrical performances, or chariot races, was almost always free. The performances were sponsored by wealthy patrons, who in most cases were ambitious politicians who wanted to gain the support of the people. Occasionally, they even sponsored the construction of new public buildings. The most striking example of this is the construction of the Flavian Amphitheater, better known as the Colosseum. Shortly after assuming the throne, Emperor Vespasian began construction of an amphitheater on the site of Nero's former personal palace. In exchange for sponsorship of the games, patrons were allowed to decide the fate of gladiators in battles by determining if the losers would die. They were also allowed to give speeches or force people to speak on their behalf in between performances. But in any case, no matter how poor a person was, they could go to the show for free. 4. Firefighters and police officers. In 7 BC, Emperor Augustus decided to change the urban structure of Rome. He divided the city into 14 districts and placed them under the control of officials, whose job was to control their part of the city and make sure that crimes and fires were prevented. It is worth noting that fires were a real headache for the city at that time. After a particularly severe fire in 06 AD, Emperor Augustus finally decided to create a government agency responsible for the safety of the city, the Vigils. Consisting of 7 cohorts of 1,000 people each, the Vigils served as modern police and fire services. Each cohort was responsible for the control of urban areas. They lived in barracks and basically devoted their whole lives to work, keeping order day and night. They had special equipment, including buckets, hooks for demolishing burning roofs, water pumps, axes, and a chemical compound called acetum, which they used to extinguish fires. Moreover, the Vigils even had a fire truck, a horse-drawn carriage with a pump. 5. Free baths as well as public entertainment facilities were free in most cases. During the reign of Diocletian, the entrance fee was only 2 bronze coins, and during state and religious holidays, admission was free. Now let's compare this to a modern gym membership, especially considering that the Roman bath had a swimming pool, sauna, changing rooms, massage rooms, and gyms. In many ways, baths served the same role as community centers in modern cities, and people went to spend their leisure time there. Most of the baths were surrounded by shops selling food and drink. Thus, the average Roman who went to the sauna in the afternoon could spend the evening with friends, swim, read. There were collections of leather scrolls with empire news in the baths, and eat almost for free. The only downside was that public baths were often very dirty, and many of the rich built their own private baths. 6. Insulae, social housing. A Roman text known as the Regional Catalogue claimed that Rome had 44,850 insulae and 1,781 domus in 315 AD. This social housing differed in that the domus was a separate mansion in which one family lived, while the insula was an apartment building in which many families rented housing. Although most of the insulae were built by private landowners, some were funded and built by the Roman government, which was trying to cope with the population boom in the capital. In many ways, the insulae were quite modern houses. The lower floor consisted of shops or workshops, while the floors above were private apartments from 1 to 4 rooms, and many of them had balconies. The insulae were mostly 4 and 5 stories high, as the laws passed by the Senate limited the buildings to 8 stories. Yes, the houses in Rome were much taller than most modern people believe, and subsequently such tall houses in cities began to be built only in modern times. Although such Roman apartment buildings certainly did not provide complete comfort, they were built en masse, and the government regulated and controlled this development. 7. Free water and toilets. Ancient Rome, just like modern cities today, provided free public toilets and drinking water fountains for the public. However, the Roman public toilet did not meet modern standards. It was a separate room with holes in the floor around the side walls. Waste was drained into the sewer or more often into a pit. There was no privacy in them, and anyone who used the toilet wiped themselves with a sponge on a stick, which was used by all other visitors. However, Roman toilets had running water from aqueducts, and they were free. Subsequently, there were no public toilets in cities, at least for another millennium. But even more important was the availability of free, fresh, and clean water in the fountains. 9 aqueducts that supplied Rome with clean water supplied 591 fountains throughout the city, each of which could provide water to 900 people. This was not only the case in Rome, but there were water collection points in Pompeii and many other Roman cities. 8. Medical care and subsidies for doctors in ancient Greece. As in many places of the ancient world, maintaining good health was a personal matter for everyone. If people were rich enough, they could pay for a doctor's consultation. However, for most, only common home remedies were available. Everything has changed in Rome. Rome's first public hospital was built in 293 BC on the island of Tibur at the expense of the Senate. Although hospitals were rare throughout the empire, they were open to everyone, and they were built with public funds, often with the money of the local magistrate. 10 little-known facts about the Roman Empire that prove that it was very progressive. The operating costs were often subsidized by donations from people who used the hospital or wealthy benefactors. Private doctors who operated their own practice were much more common. Many of these doctors were paid by the Roman government and charged patients according to their income. For the poorest, diagnosis and prescription were very cheap, although treatment was never free. 9. Collegium, social clubs during the Roman Republic. Almost anyone could create a club or college. All it took was 3 people. These groups were very important in everyday society, essentially acting like guilds in medieval times. Groups of people from the same profession gathered together and pooled their resources, investing money in a collective bank that provided insurance if any of the group members fell ill, died, or lost their home. The college was something like a modern corporation, a social club, and a political party all rolled into one. Since any 3 free people could form a board, these associations quickly became popular among poorer people in society to lobby for certain political actions. Such boards became more and more common until they began to be considered a significant threat to the state. When the Republic gave way to the Empire, one of the first decrees of the Emperor was to strictly restrict the creation of new colleges. Now it required personal permission from the Emperor, and not just the consent of other people. 10. The natural theory of diseases in 36 BC. Roman writer and scientist Marcus Terentius Varro wrote that new buildings should not be built close to swamps because of the risk posed by small creatures invisible to the eye that enter the body through the nose and mouth and cause serious diseases. Although this idea was too innovative for Roman society, most Romans adhered to the natural theory of diseases rather than the divine one. Most often, they believed that the cause of the disease could be unpleasant odors, as well as an imbalance of fluids called humors in the body. Mark Varro's statement was the closest thing to a modern understanding of microbes, and his theory on how to avoid illness was largely accurate. Keep fit, rest during illness, drink clean water. Don't stay in one place for too long, avoid humid environments, and wash regularly. Subscribe to the channel and like it.